So, how to lead your organization using the 5 levels of leadership. So, this is certainly one of my favorite topics, and it's probably the most important one of everything that we're doing. And the reason for that is because all the best practices we're teaching in our entire training center here, all of the content, the dashboards, the process, the documentation, all of it. If you can't lead your organization through these adjustments and teach them, educate and train them yourself and lead them yourself, it won't matter. So what I'm going to do today is a 2-part piece. I think I mentioned on a few of our other trainings, I spent 14 years in the United States Army, and I taught at the military academy for 4 years, and leadership was one of my topics, so I've got a pretty firm grasp on the topic. I went to John Maxwell's school and got certified with him. He has over 100 books. I've read about 13 of them. I got 2 of them queued up in my Audible now. And I'm constantly trying to feed myself with as much leadership stuff as I can, because my job constantly is to lead the folks that I lead, but more importantly is lead myself, which is the hardest thing to do. And those of you who are CEOs who are watching this, and those of you who are sales professionals that are watching this, you have to get up every day and get yourself into character and get going and push yourself. Some of you may have somebody pushing you, but some of you have to do that yourself. And it's not easy. And if you don't have a way to put a leadership culture in place in your company, this is a way to do it. And I'm going to teach you and show you how to do that today. I'm going to use a lot of the military's terminology and philosophy, because I think we'd all would agree that the military has a pretty firm grasp on how to lead. You get men and women to do things that you can not normally get folks to do in the civilian life. And for those of you who think that people in the military just follow orders because somebody's put in charge of them, and from John Maxwell's perspective, a level 1 leader, if you think they just follow because of that, you are sadly mistaken. You're asking folks to do some very unique and very dangerous things. They have to believe in you and want to follow you, and if they don't, they won't. So it's not as giving an order as it may appear if you've seen a lot of times. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a very difficult thing to be good at. So it requires a whole lot of training, which they're probably better at than anyone in terms of training folks. But I think some of the material here today will be helpful. That's why we put it into the training. We've done this session a number of times at some of my Ingram conferences, and they've all been very well received. But I thought we'd put it on our training center because we've never done that. So here's some more of the John Maxwell books I'd like you to look at. Obviously, the 5 level ones, that you got to read that one if you don't read any book. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is very good. And I can't do them justice for all the books. There's one just on the types of questions a leader should ask, which is fantastic also. Probably the next time I do that, I'll add it. But all of these are phenomenal books. And if you've been around a long time, which a lot of you have, 20, 25 years, you're doing a lot of this stuff already. But what you're trying to do with this is come up with a way to articulate it to your team, communicate it in such a way that they can do it too, or they can follow you. You have a language that everybody can agree to about. When you hear about a personality problem with one of your leaders and a junior leader, you can start asking questions around certain things. That's why I like DISC. That's why I like the 5 levels of leadership. I can say to the subordinate leader, do you have a level 2 relationship with this person? What is their DISC? Are they the opposite of you? Have you done all those other little things it takes to do what you're supposed to do to get this person to want to follow you? I think I'm going to cover this later, but I love the line where John Maxwell says, nobody cares what you have to say until they know that you care. That's a salient statement. So as a person that's a leader of men and women and have to do a job, you've got to understand that. And I will tell you this, because every engagement that we do, usually probably 98% of the time, there's a leadership problem there. Is why they can't grow. And sometimes it's you, the CEO of the company. I've had that happen a few times where there was no way we were going to make this company better because the leader wasn't going to leave. And that was not part of this. And I've had one guy say to me, well, if you want me to, we'll get a CEO to come in and take over and I'll take a different role. I said, that's easier said than done. And that's candidly the reason why your company hasn't grown is because of you. And you are not doing anything to get better. You think because you're in charge and you're the boss, you might be responsible for the place. That doesn't make you a leader. This makes you responsible. So it's really hard for people to hear that. And one of the things that really stuck out with me with John Maxwell, I mean, there's so much, but just a couple of things that jump out at me just as I'm thinking through this is if you define your success as a professional by how well the people below you are doing, that'll tell you everything. Because I run into leaders all the time who separate themselves from the bad performance or the bad behavior or the bad antics and communication, etc., that their staff is doing, as if they don't even work there. I've got an engagement right now where the leader's constantly telling me about how bad some of the sales folks are who he hired, who he trained. And I said to him the other day, I said, so what do you want to do about it? You keep telling me how bad this person is and how poorly performing they are. You hired them. You're paying them every 2 weeks. And what ends up happening, and we're going to talk about this, is that they can't bring themselves to let the person go because they would have to admit that they made a bad decision. And I get some of that. But at some point, you've got to make a decision. That's a big part of being a leader also. And that other person might be waiting on you to do it as well. But either way, it comes back to how you're communicating to your folks and them understanding where they are as it relates to your perspective on how they're doing, how they're performing, and how well you're communicating that. I mean, there's a variety of things I want you to think about here, but the most important point here is you've got to have a leadership language within your management group that pushes all the way down to the person, the lowest person on the employee list who does whatever job they do, all the way up to you, and it's got to communicate through all of them. And you've got to have a way to do that. And I think the 5 levels of leadership gives you a way to do that if you don't have any other way to do it. Because if the leadership training is working and people are getting it, they're pushing themselves. If you're using, I think a lot of us are doing a lot of the training I'm trying to think of the book now, the Traction book, which I love, which we put in place, but that also challenges you. You have these quarterly rocks. You have these level 10 and same page meetings and all these things to-do lists. Well, you have a way to visibly see it all now, but how do you hold people accountable when they don't do it? Just putting down the rock for the sake of doing that. What happens if they don't do it? What are you doing to take care of that, to make sure it does happen and it gets executed? So this is where the leadership part comes into play. And if you don't have a leadership culture in place and that folks understand, it's going to be difficult for you to get to the next step. So I'm going to start with DISC profiles. And I believe in behavioral profiles. If you don't like DISC, then find something that you do like. Because this, when we started working with DISC 10 years ago, it changed everything for me and how I started to read people and try to understand what it is they need from me as a leader. How do I communicate to them? Most of us communicate very well with people who are just like ourselves. That's easy because they just get it. But you've got to lead the entire team. And you can't have a whole bunch of folks that are just like you. That won't work. And I think we all know that. So there's no such thing as a bad DISC. These are the things that the DISC measures. So what we're looking for is having, again, a common language that everybody can understand very quickly. That's why I like DISC, is because I can teach someone how to understand what DISC means, how to utilize it in the workplace, how to utilize it in a sales engagement in a few hours. So, and I've got folks who get really into it and get super excited about it. I mean, there's even a program now where you can go on to LinkedIn, and when you go to LinkedIn, there's a plugin that you can put into your website, put onto your browser. It'll give you a DISC assessment of the person who you're just opening up their LinkedIn profile for the first time. And I thought, wow, how are they doing that? I still don't know how they're doing it, but I tested it against people's DISC that I already have, and every single time it was spot on. So what it's designed to do is, if you go into a sales engagement with someone you've never met before, and somebody set a meeting for you, it gives you some idea whether this person is a high I or high D or high C person. And sometimes you could tell that by the job they have, but that's not always true. But it gives you some idea of who you're going to talk to. And what I always tell my sales professionals or sales leaders, always give the prospect the presentation of the meeting that they want, not the one that you want, because they're the person that's sitting there processing the information. So if they want to hear a lot of detail and personal stuff about you because they're a high I, then give them that. But if they want, bottom line up front, give me specifics and detail and stats and very accountable type data because they're a high C and they process differently, then give them that. But a lot of times I see what happens is my high I's are giving these high C's a high I presentation that turns them off and they become irritated by them. So you don't want that to happen. So here's a quick snapshot of On Disc. If you've never heard of it, I'd be surprised if you haven't. But if you haven't, here's what it means. In the sales world, what we normally see is the most best performing sales professionals, and we've disked over 10,000 people to give us this number, typically are a dominant high D, a dominant high I. Most engineers, help desk, NOC folks, are high S's and high C's. Most CEOs of companies are either DIs or DCs. And certainly there's other variables. I'm talking about the majority. So when I'm working with leaders like this, it gives me a pretty good idea of how to talk to them in a way that gets right to the point, very direct. So I understand that. It also tells me when I have a person in a sales role with a low D, if I do have them in there and I've seen it happen, I've got to push them a lot because they're not going to push themselves as quickly as I'd want them to. So you've got, in terms of the management style, versus I have a person who's a high C who's good at process and documentation and details, I'm not going to be following up behind them on this kind of stuff this much because they already know how to do that and they're going to do that on their own because it's built into their DNA. Versus a high D, high I person who's got a very low C and a very low S, paperwork's going to challenge them. So I got to make sure I follow up with them more often and make sure that the details and stuff are being taken care of because they'll miss that. So really quickly, just in case you haven't, I'm going through this quickly because some of you probably can't really not run into very many people who've not heard of DISC. But just the high D, and if you've got if you're a CEO, you'll probably relate to some of these right away. But the high D folks are the folks that you see that are leading companies, typically very aggressive. Sometimes people call them arrogant, demanding, pushy. They're driven. That's why I like them in a sales role. And again, you don't want a whole company of high Ds because that won't work because you have a whole bunch of folks trying to take over. And you need people that are going to follow and go make stuff happen. So you'll see that difference out in the field. Now your high I's, again, it's mostly a sales folks, very inspiring, very magnetic personalities, very dominating, talks a lot, takes over conversations all the time. Now notice what's interesting about this is your low I, which tends to be your engineers, who are always critical, very logical, very pessimistic, don't trust the salespeople at all. You see it all the time. So when you understand these dimensions, I don't use these as a way to evaluate somebody and make somebody wrong or right. It just lets you understand who you're dealing with. Even in your family, even with your kids, when you understand this about them, I've had a couple of engagements where husband and wife took the disc, really nothing to do with what we were doing, but the husband was irritating the wife constantly because he was high D high, constantly forgetting stuff all the time, leaving his keys places, leaving his phone places, and she happened to be a very high C and was driving her crazy. She kind of thought he was just doing it to irritate her. And when she saw this, she goes, you do this with everyone. That's just who he is. And once you understand that, at least it gives you a way to be a little bit more tolerant because that's just who that person is. And there's really not much you can do to change them. I mean, they have a natural and adaptive style, but the person they are is the person they are. Just don't get pissed off when they constantly lose stuff. Battery on the phone dies. It's like, how do you not know to plug in your phone and charge it? You think the high C thinks that's just unbelievably simple. But the high I was distracted by 3 other things that at the time they thought were more important. So your high S's. No, this is your engineers again. Very relaxed. They don't like change. It's just my way. I've already given you the process. Just follow it. I don't understand why this is a difficult thing. I've explained it to you multiple times. I created a checklist for you. Just check the boxes and follow simple instructor. Very patient, very easygoing for the most part. But they pretty much, that what I like to see, those SCs are kind of folks who could win the lottery or something traumatic happened in their life, and their facial expression won't change. So you can see them all the time. So it's pretty interesting. Now your low S, which is typically your sales professionals, hyper intensive, impulsive, impatient. That D is up here pushing them, and that S is down here. They just want to get it done. They can't wait, or they're willing to take a whole bunch of risk. All that stuff that drives the high S or the SC mad when they see that. So you're looking at people who have very different personalities who have to work together. So you as a leader has to understand these factors so you can manage them. Because one of the things I used to say all the time, back when we had a larger staff here, there was always someone disagreeing or getting into some kind of disagreement almost all the time. And when I got involved, I would say, well, what are their discs? Because typically they were fighting about something that they both felt very strongly about in very different ways. Now your high C, again, a lot of engineers, technical folks, hear the difference between them, very detailed. They want things done a certain way. They just don't have a whole lot of patience for people who are not detailed and thorough like themselves. This is part of who they are. So you have to understand that. And then, of course, you got your low Cs, which is a lot of your engineers, a lot of your sales folks. So they're careless with paperwork and details, and it drives the high C completely crazy. So you have to understand this about them. So DISC or some version of this for behavior profiles, so you help you understand your people. Because this is going to feed into some of the other stuff we're going to talk about when we get into leadership assessments, is understanding who your people are, and don't judge them for being different than you. Just understand how to lead them. A good example is when I was dealing with high Ds, don't yell at a high D, because their natural intuition is they're comfortable dealing with confrontation. So if you want to fight, they will bring it to you. And usually high Ds, when you come at them in a very low tone, even if you're being critical and you're more direct with them, they can take it. And they'll process it a lot better than if you're yelling at them. You yell at them, they're going to yell back at you. Not that you should yell at anyone, but those are the worst people in the world to yell at. So just little tidbits around that. Just understand who they are and and one of the things, of course, if you're a high C, high D, and you can't, I don't want to say can't stand the high I, that's not fair, but if it's hard for you to deal with the high I's, I see this a lot. And I tell all my, a lot of these tech CEOs, a lot of them are DCs. So it drives them mad when they have to deal with these high I, DI folks who will not stop talking. And I tell them all the time, you have to let them exhaust themselves. They interpret how much you care about what they have to do today or for you at any given time by how much you're willing to listen to what they have to say. If you cut them off too much, they'll think you don't care, and that's the last thing you want them to think. Because I will remind you, when we do a lot of recruitment for companies, for sales hires, and the question I ask all the time with a sales leader, I say, why are you leaving the company? And I've said this before, to leave for 3 reasons. This change of command, the company's been purchased or acquired, and there's new leadership coming in, and they don't like the new leadership, it doesn't feel right to them. The compensation plans changed a lot, they've had enough of it, or they can't stay connected with the leader anymore. They lost the connection. They started to think that this person didn't care or doesn't care about them. And they think that through lots of different ways. Well, if you're going to change my comp plan, why do you come and talk to me about it first? Well, you don't necessarily have to do that, but if you don't respect them properly in that way and they interpret that you don't care, that's the first step to them leaving. So sometimes you don't have to do things a certain way because you're in a position of authority that says you don't have to, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it that way. Involve them, communicate with them. We're going to talk about communication in a second, because the way they interpret your behavior will the way they interpret the relationship. And respect is something as a leader that you want from all the people, but are you willing to give it back to folks the same way? And do you even understand that? That's why sometimes it takes for you to be a great leader You've got to be a phenomenal follower and understand the differences between the two. It's really, really important. So let's get into the assessments a little bit. So inside of the 5 levels of leadership, they have some assessments that you can give out. We've done these. We have some of them in, I think we have all of them set up in SurveyMonkey. So when we've done these leadership assessment exercises for clients, these are very telling. And I can tell a lot about the leader when I ask them these questions about which of the assessments you want us to do. So there's an individual assessment that each person can take that will evaluate them. Then there's one your direct report gets, who you report directly to. And then there's one, the C-level leadership, where you rate the leaders of the company. And you can do that when we've done it anonymously, or we've done it where you can see what they say. Now, the real secure leaders want them to, hey, let them put their name in. I don't care. Because it won't bother me. I can take it. I understand. In fact, I want the feedback. And most of them, a lot of times, will not do that. And it's really tough when they see how critical some people can be of them. And then rate your leaders survey assessments, all the leaders in the organization. We can do an overall assessment and get everybody to rate everybody, all the key leaders in the company, and then we can graph those and all this type of stuff. But I got to tell you, if you're serious about growing your company, and I've been involved with some great companies that were very transparent with the financial status of the company and let everybody see this kind of stuff, the leadership assessment is another way to be very transparent. I mean, all of us are leaders in training all the time. We're all learning how to do it all the time. Same thing with sales. You never master it completely. You have to keep feeding yourself constantly on how to be better at it. And a leadership probably is twice as hard as being a sales professional, in my view, is being a leader. Because no matter, one thing is interesting, as you go through the 5 levels of leadership, you get to level 3 or level 4 with somebody and you've worked on it for years to get to that point. And then a new hire comes in, and guess what? They're at level 1 with you right away. You go, wow, I've got to start all the way over. It's an enormous amount of work. That's why it's not for everyone. But your organizational leadership and get the baseline of where you stand as a group is such an important exercise. That's why I love the 5 levels of leadership by John Maxwell, because I think it helps you build that foundation. And that's really what it's about. I mean, identifying your junior leaders, folks that you want to bring along, get them trained and build them up, show them the vision and say, hey, here, you're a person that I can see right now that with some tweaking and training and development, you could be at this key position. That's one of the reasons why I tell all our clients to build a complete company organizational chart. Okay, here's where we are now. Here's the company we want to be. So we're $5 million now. We want to be $10 million in 5 years or whatever the numbers are. But to do that lift, it's going to mean we have to add 5, 10 more people, whatever that number is, which means some of you've got to move up into other key positions. So you may go from a director level to a VP level or whatever that might be. But if, in the process of you doing that, you've got to grow and get better. So we've got to build a culture around how we go about doing that and a plan. Because I'm here to tell you that if you can put this in place and get everybody motivated and excited and passionate about it, all the rest of your plans that you develop from traction and other things will feed this. Not the other way around. Putting the process in place like traction and just showing folks how to track what they're doing, how to hold them accountable on paper doesn't drive them. And as you'll see when we get into the level 2 and level 3 leadership stuff, what really gets people excited about doing what you want them to do is how passionate they think you are about making them better. You help a person get to the point where they can financially afford to buy a house, and they'll do anything else you want them to do. Because that's the thing that drives them. Why are they coming to work today? Guy gets married, has a wife, now he wants to get a house for his family, and you show him a way to do that, how to make enough sales, make enough money to put down on the house and purchase a home, changes everything. I was on a call with a client recently. There's their quarterly review, and I thought was salient. They announced on the call of their 45 employees how many this quarter were able to close on a house. That was huge. So if you weren't one of those people, you're thinking about that, that makes you want to be part of that company, because that's something that organization is doing to drive individual behavior that feeds back into the company. Such an important thing. So what's your definition of a leader? People always say, it's a joke all the time, when I've done these sessions in a bigger forum, I ask around the room, I say, what's your definition of a leader? And everybody comes back with all kinds of different things. And a lot of folks can't, how do you say, they can't give you what they would consider to be a definition of a leader, but they certainly know one when they see one. It's really as simple as that. And I attribute that to some extent, a lot of everyone's upbringing. We've had great pastors in our church, parents that were great leaders, other family members that were great leaders for us, that we saw them do all these things exceptionally well. Now, you may not realize it, but some of the folks that work for you are evaluating you against some of these great leaders that have been around in their family, and you may not even be aware of it. You're not doing those little things that they were taught by other folks on how to lead. But I will leave you with the one key definition for leader for me is your ability to simply, and I'm quoting this from John Maxwell, but I like the simplicity of it, is your ability to influence other people. It's as simple as that. Your ability to influence other people. Can you influence them to do what you need them to do whatever that means as it relates to your organization? More sales, better help desk operations, better customer service, you name it. What can you do or what are you doing to influence them to do that and want to do that specifically for you? How are you going about doing that? So let's get into the weeds a little bit on some of the military stuff. This is a huge, obviously they got lots of content, so I had to grab what I thought would be relevant. So the leader in the situation and communication. That's what I'm going to hit on, and the principles of leadership, which I think are very, very important. And some of this, and I know everything I'm going to share with you today, you already know. You already know. But putting this in place in your organization and speaking around these terms all the time are very, very important. In fact, I had a client a couple of years ago. We did a leadership session with their group, and the sales manager was so inspired. He said, well, what should my next book be? I said, well, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, I think, is your number 2 book. He read it, was so inspired by it, in his whiteboard in his office, he wrote down all 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership on his whiteboard. So he had 9 sales reps reporting to him, a little more than we like, but he had that many. And every time one would come in and violate one of those, he would show it to him on the wall. And then they started getting into it. And then we got to a point that every 2 weeks on the sales meeting, we would take an excerpt from one of the John Maxwell books and read it out loud. And it started getting just a culture or a DNA built around leadership, which I thought was fantastic for him. So the people that you're leading, how do you evaluate the people that are working for you, that you've picked? You know, how motivated, how competent are they, how committed are they to what you're doing? Now, clearly, when you hire them, you think all these things are there, but the competency is also important. I always tell folks, especially in the IT space, you've got to be smart to work here. If you can't keep up, we're going to have a problem. So some of that stuff and your ability to evaluate them will determine how you deploy them, what job you give them, what assignments you give them, what clients you give them, all these kinds of things. You've got to have a clear understanding of what their abilities are if you're going to lead them. So if you can't assess them properly as a leader, you're going to put them in situations where they can't be successful. And that's going to come back on you. And you'll see that in their motivation or lack thereof. So creating a climate where people feel like they can accomplish their goals. I believe in being positive no matter what. Always, half full versus half empty all the time. And probably the most important bullet on here is, do the people you work for trust and respect you? And have you created a culture and you don't talk down to them, undermine them, belittle them, micromanage them, all these kinds of things. If you've got to do all that, you've got the wrong people. And how are you going to lead them if you don't have that mutual respect there? And if they're not talented enough to do the things you want them to do, then they shouldn't be working there. But you'll be amazed when you have the right people that this makes sense for, who respect and trust you, how much confidence they will have and how much better performance you will get from them when that's set up and pretty clear for them. But you've got to evaluate that. I know that seems obvious, but I run into it all the time where you've got a person in the job that you tell me is not, well, I don't think she's smart enough to do that, or he's smart enough to do that, or I don't think this is outside their comfort zone. I go, well, why are they here then? I don't understand that. They're in a situation where they can't get better, and that's not good for them. Now, you as a leader, obviously, if you're especially in this space, because we run into so many really bright people all the time, that sometimes they struggle with evaluating themselves. You know, who you are, what did you know, what can you do? And I would tell you, if you're not comfortable evaluating yourself, you know who is evaluating you? The people that work for you. They're doing it all the time. But you've got to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And one of my favorite phrases in one of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies says, a man's got to know his limitation. And I imagine a woman does too. You got to know what you can't do. You can't do everything. You can't do everything well. So we had a phrase in the military all the time of deploy your people in accordance with their capabilities. Don't ask a person to do something that they're not trained to do or don't know how to do. I mean, that's you setting them up for failure. But you also have to understand the areas where you need some work and be comfortable telling your folks where you're weak. They know what you can't do, whether you want to admit it or not. And it's okay to do that. In fact, I think most of the people that your subordinates will appreciate the fact that you're vulnerable with them with respect to what you can't do, than thinking you can do everything, because you just can't. Nobody can. But that's a relationship thing you've got to work out with them. And that gets developed over one-to-one counseling sessions where you get to be more transparent around this. Now, and I like those in here because all situations are different. This is thing where people say, you treated me unfairly. You did this for Bob and didn't do this for Jane. And my whole thing about this whole concept of, you weren't fair. And I heard a phrase, if you want fair, you should go home to mom. And they have fair where they have, pigs and goats and all that stuff. If that's what you wanted, to go there. And as ridiculous as that might sound to you, there's something to it, because every situation is not the same. It just isn't. Not all people get the same stuff all the time. And it's all in how you do that. Some people say, I try to be fair with everyone. Well, I don't know what that means. And when your people don't understand what that means, they can take a situation out of context and see you do something for someone else that you did not do for them and misinterpret that, and now you've got a problem. That's why in the level 2 relationship piece, when we get to that, you've got to understand everything that's going on with the people that you lead and what they value and what's important to them and how that relates back to you. So when they see you do something that they don't think is quote unquote fair, or something's different for someone else, I mean, a simple example is you let a certain person work from home, but you won't let somebody else work from home. Well, why is that? How did they get that preferential treatment and you didn't, and even though you asked them and told no? And you didn't explain that properly, didn't communicate that properly. And that can be the first sign of somebody starting to lose somebody, because they think you disrespected them, you treated them unfairly. So how you communicate that, whether you think you should have to or not, is a significant thing depending on who it is you're talking to. So remember that, because I hear it all the time when we get on engagements, how there's rules for certain people that are different than other folks. And I certainly understand how people might think that. But sometimes it comes back to this one bullet right here: communication. How you're communicating with people. And not this passive communication through email or texting people. Sit down with people, look them in the eye, and tell them what's going on. And believe me, it's hard for me. I have people on my team that I love and adore and love working for. It's hard for me to sit them down and explain to them what's going on and why I'm not happy with their performance. Because I know they're giving me everything they got. I know they're working as hard as they can for me. But as my job as the leader, and remember this, when you don't communicate with people the way it's supposed to be done because you are afraid of hurting their feelings, you're also treating them the same, you're teaching them to do something when their turn comes to lead folks, or if they're already leading people, they're going to follow the same thing you do in a lot of cases, unless they're strong enough to do a better job than you're doing. So if you're passive aggressive, or you wait to the last minute to communicate stuff, or you do it poorly, or you do it informally, and like some people say, don't text me something like that. And people don't like what you have to say sometimes when you have to say bad news, but they'll appreciate the fact that you're able to look them in the eye and tell them what's going on. They're not kids. They can understand. They can handle it. But you've got to be strong enough as a leader to communicate what you want done and communicate it the right way. So this speaks right to this point here, that you've got to be able, this goes back, setting an example. Look at your behavior and how you do what you do. They're watching you. Whether you want them to watch you or not, they're watching you. Everything that you do. So effective communication to the team, the way you want people to hear and understand what you're saying. One of these things that I've seen that people get wrong sometimes is, well, I thought I was communicating it properly and it just wasn't happening. People weren't understanding what I was saying. Well, when you know you have that problem, then get folks to tell you back. They say we used to call it a brief back. And just, hey, you guys, this is what we're talking about. This is what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Somebody tell me what I just said and make sure that what I think is being understood is what's being understood, and send it back to me. Because your ability to get people to hear you and understand what you're doing, understand your message, and clearly be able to go out and execute it is a huge thing. Because I get into this even with clients every day. We're communicating back and forth through email, and I'm an email kind of guy sometimes. But I go, look, just get on the phone and just hey, I can't understand what you're trying to say. If I go out and execute incorrectly, then we got a problem. So get on the phone or get into a room. Let's get it understood so we can communicate properly. Same thing with your people. And I run into this all the time where people says, well, he told me to do this, and then when I did it, he told me that I didn't understand what he told me to do, so he's telling me that I failed to execute the task. I say, frankly, he's going to say, or she's going to say, I told you what I said. I know what I said because I was there when I said it. I've heard that phrase a couple of times. I thought it was kind of interesting. And so instead of giving yourself some room to understand that, hey, maybe you didn't communicate it right. Based on the way they executed, I'm not saying that you didn't say what you said, but it wasn't clear enough for them to understand it. And if you don't get that cadence down, you can find yourself spending a lot of time correcting yourself or trying to course correct things that should be articulated in a way that people can understand what you're saying and follow the example that you're setting. It's such an important thing, because communication management or communication process or whatever you want to call it is a big deal every day. I see it all the time, and people mess it up. And it always creates blowback. I've seen people leave companies over stuff like this. So this is every one of these bullets here, I'm not going to read them all to you, but they're super important. But the one that's the most important to me here is you setting the proper example. Don't do as I say, do as I do. If I come to work late, you can come to work late. And probably my number one tip here, which irritates me, is make sound and timely decisions. Because no one likes sitting there asking a question, can we do this? Do we have budget for this? What's the next step? And you can't make a decision. And it slows everybody else down. So remember, you're setting a standard on the way people dress at the office, the way people speak. If you using profanity, then everybody's going to use profanity who wants to use it. Whatever standard you want to set, whether you're aware of it or not, you're setting it. And when people come to work for you who don't know you and watch you, they're watching everything you do. So you can't be saying one thing and doing another if you want respect from people and you want people to respect you. And I know everybody knows this. It's not that it's not that a difficult thing to understand. But it's such a big thing. And this one here, seek responsibility and take responsibility for your action. Nobody can stand it when you're the boss. Yes, I work for you and we did something wrong and I did it wrong. And we get to the big meeting and you throw me under the bus. Even though I report to you and you and I both know you and I worked on this together and you had the final say, but you throw me under the bus because you're afraid of taking the hit. Then you just lost me as a leader. I'm done. Now you may have a way to earn it back to me, but I don't trust you anymore at that point. Your job is and if you take the hit from me, I'll appreciate that. Next time I'm not going to let that happen again. That tells me what kind of leader you are. But if you're too busy trying to be right all the time instead of leading, you're going to get what you get for that. And people see you being that kind of person, they're just going to leave. And you have a whole bunch of people sitting around you who are yes people who agree with everything you say because they just figure that's what you want to hear. You can't grow a business or grow a team like that. I mean, you can try, but you won't have any real leaders there with you. It's just the way it works out. Know your people, look out for their well-being. Defend your folks, take care of them. Find out what their needs are and try to take care of it. That's such an important thing, and people notice that. When they see you going out of your way to do things for them, it's really important, and they'll reciprocate that back. It all comes back to that level 2 relationship. That's such an important aspect of all of this. This is a big one. So what do you value and what do you believe in? I see this all the time, and people think that people understand what they're doing, meaning your philosophy in life, this goes back to culture, your philosophy and how you see things being done. I see it all the time. When you work late, you'll work weekends, you'll work nights, and you think because you somehow assume that everybody sees that the same way you do. Or the little things that you're willing to do that other people aren't willing to do. And the things that you value, the same thing that they value. That goes back to communication. They should know what you stand for so they can appreciate how that impacts them. And you should have somebody working for you who's aligned on the same level as you are when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's really, really important. So character, it's a big one. So I see this all the time. You get down to making tough decisions. Going back to that point about, you're in a big meeting and there was a mistake made by one of your people, and you, instead of taking the hit for it, you throw them on the bus in front of everybody. That speaks to your character right there, and what kind of leader you are, and the way your people might see you, and how internally are you driven to take responsibility for what your people do and what your people don't do, and they see you under those conditions taking a hit for everybody. Really, really, really important. Now, this one here is interesting. People want to be led by people who have brought strength and inspiration and guidance. It doesn't mean you have to be a rah-rah person. There's lots of ways of showing to inspire folks and to show direction and guidance and be strong. You don't have to be this, super motivational speaker type person. People can see and feel that just from your behavior and the little things that you do and how you communicate with them. How often do you tell people how good of a job they're doing? I was in a conference once and a guy said to me that, you should, every single day, if you've got 10 people working for you, you should, his thing was take 10 pennies and put them in your left pocket, and every day before the day's over, at least give every person on your team a compliment on how good of a job they're doing. Find something that they're doing great and let them know how great of a job they're doing. I didn't do the 10 penny thing, but I thought there was something to that. People believe, and I don't care what anybody says about, I don't need to be told how great of a job I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. That's okay. That's not for you to try to slice that up. The point of it is, people want to be told how good of a job they're doing. You seem to have no problem telling them when they're doing a bad job. Compliment them as much as you possibly can. People feed off of that. If you're that kind of leader, you should work on that. If you're not doing a good job of that. Now, if nobody's doing anything worth complimenting, you probably have the wrong people working for you. So this is kind of summarized here. We talked about the definition of leadership, all the little things you need to do to work on improving your leadership, and certainly how your leadership impacts the organization, because you set the tone for everything. And the culture of leadership has been set and established in your company or not. And who are your leaders in your company? When I engage an opportunity, I found that it's not always the people who are in leadership positions that are actually the leaders. Sometimes it's other people that are running the show behind the scenes because people respect them and they've done a great job for so long that people want to work for them, but they don't have the job title as manager or leader, but they're doing a great job of leading anyway. So I hope this was helpful. This is part 1. I'm going to talk about the 5 levels of leadership stuff specifically in part 2. Thank you.